Hi, welcome to another session with the Rooster. I've got Andy Jiang here with me. I've known Andy for probably, well, I don't know, it must be close to 10 years. Oh, we met 10 years ago. You
Right.
moved on to better things and further away. Andy, maybe just give us an intro of yourself, what you do and what you've been up to, and your thoughts.
Hi, Noah. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and to share my perspective on the recovery of COVID-19 and specifically for the tourism industry. Just a bit background about me. As you can see, I'm Chinese. I was born in Shanghai, and I worked in many countries around the world, and now I'm based in Sydney. I've got my own consulting practice, just helping a few clients to tap into the Chinese consumers to understand the mindset and therefore to understand the consumer behaviors, so to help to build their business for the future. And prior to running my own business, I worked for Tourism Australia, first as its head of Asia development, and then spent 2 years running Tourism Australia on the ground in Shanghai, responsible for the entire China market. As you know, that China is the largest inbound market for Australian tourism industry. In fact, Chinese travelers account for 27% of total international expenditure here in Australia. And before that, I was living and working in Perth in the energy resources and mining space. So that's me.
My interest, I wanted to catch up with because obviously you've done a lot in the tourism industry, and I don't know. It's probably safe to say that tourism activity is close to 0% at the moment. What? Give us your thoughts because you're quite involved in Tourism Australia, and obviously a lot of business came from mainland China, and now there's just nothing, right? We're not even just talking about one nation now. So I'd love to get your point of view of that industry at this point in time.
Look, that's a very interesting question, and even though I don't want to say it's at 0% absolutely, but all indication point to a very depressed level of activities in the tourism space. When you recall how COVID-19 started, it started in Wuhan, China, right before the Chinese Lunar New Year. So when the government imposed the lockdown across China, that effectively limited the outbound Chinese travelers at a time where it's considered peak travel season for Australia to receive those Chinese travelers. So following the Chinese government's lockdown and then subsequent travel ban issued by the Australian government for the month of February, the Australian tourism industry had received very, very limited Chinese inbound travelers. And of course, when things deteriorated from February to now, what we have seen that not only the Australian government has placed more countries on the travel ban, it has effectively closed the border. So we don't have any international travelers coming to Australia at this current time. And then all the states are closing their borders. So even domestic travel is discouraged. And therefore, we are looking at the picture where the Australians are not encouraged to travel to other states or to other countries. In fact, we're encouraged to stay home, and so that means a significant impact for tourism and hospitality industry, and that's where we are.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of my questions, that, domestically we could see, like you said, a recovery in months, but internationally I really can't see that happening. And even that, a lot of places, even like China, they're talking about potentially they're bracing themselves for a second wave. And that is a realistic thing for everybody. If they curb their internal issues, there's the issue of the external issues as well. But I guess in some ways, looking, and we know the worst case scenario. We're in it. May not have passed it, but we're in it. We know I guess for a lot of people now is how to regenerate their business into a different form for the time to come. Like what you're implying is that, you do it this way before, you might have to change to a different way going forward, because you can't stand still, right?
Now, what you ask is essentially how the recovery of tourism industry will play out. And I think that, first of all, we need to be realistic about the restrictions which are currently in place. The social distancing measures and the states closing the borders are likely to stay for the next 5 to 6 months. And that is the message being sent by the Prime Minister as well as the state premiers. And that will likely take us to the end of September. The best case scenario is that if we manage to flatten the curve faster, and we manage to produce vaccine or the drugs, then we might be able to lift those restrictions earlier. But let's assume that the border closures across different states in Australia will be in place until September. Then the recovery of domestic tourism will likely to take place at that point, and that will take us to probably to the Christmas, the peak travel season. But I don't think that even for domestic tourism that the social distancing measure will disappear completely, which means that from a business perspective, you've got to look at the way that you currently deliver experiences to your consumers, right? Will these experiences be still in the context of social distancing practice be valid going forward? And if not, what can you do to ensure that the compliance of these activities, these experiences from a social distancing perspective, so to protect the broader society? And for international tourism, it's going to be even a longer road for recovery. And the reason being is that I don't envision Australia will lift its border in September. In fact, I think in order for Australia to lift its border, then the countries, other countries will have to somehow not present a risk to Australia when the travelers come to Australia. And because different countries are currently on a different trajectory of the COVID-19, a different journey, and that means that there will be the time difference or timing difference of some countries presenting a lower risk, while other countries will present a higher risk. And I think that the Australian government might be looking at a gradual lift of our country border to receiving foreign travelers, probably in 2021, and it's going to be done in a phased approach. And so the full recovery of international inbound tourism will be some time away. And I think for many businesses who have been very active in the international tourism space might need to look at how to balance the portfolio of domestic traffic versus international traffic, and so that in the short run, that the business will still be able to manage through this COVID-19 crisis. Now, what are some of the tourism operators or industry are doing in preparation for this recovery? And I've seen, the tourism industry has always been a very resilient industry, because at the end of the day, travel is part of our lifestyle, right? I mean, we look into our lives and we actually feel that this is not necessarily a discretionary spend. It is, at least for me, I travel all the time. I love it. I mean, it's an opportunity for me to experience different culture, and to really learn and to grow, right? And so a lot of us right now who are locked up at home are really dreaming about where to go when this whole thing is over. So this is the optimism in the travel industry that we just have to hold out and to wait it out. But by no means that we just wait and do nothing. So I remember that recently visit Portugal, and so the Portugal's destination marketing agency released a new ad, promoting Portugal, and it's called "Can't Skip Hope." And the message of that ad is that it's time to stop, because only when we stop that we can defeat this virus. And it's about care for other people from a distance. And the monuments, all the attractions, and all the sceneries, they're not going anywhere. They're still here, when COVID-19 is over. So you can always come back, but right now it's time to dream. And as this beautiful message is being delivered, the video shows amazing landscape of Portugal, with that sort of creation of demand, so that when this is over, they will remember there's such a place called Portugal and how beautiful it is. And I think that ad is actually fit for our times. It's not saying come to Portugal right away, but at the same time, it is creating, and implanting that message of visit Portugal, so that as soon as the circumstances allow, that the travelers will book the travel to that country. And I'm also seeing, for example, the hotel industry now, that they're working with the government to provide spaces for the travelers who need to be quarantined. And so instead of having those hotel rooms empty, they're actually utilizing the room for a social purpose that helps the country to fight this virus. And I think that also shows the resilience of the industry, that as an industry, we're not just sitting there and waiting, right? We're actually doing good things to be in this fight, and that none is lost. At the same time, I also believe that this is the moment where you don't necessarily fire all your staff, but you actually, have a moment to connect with your team members, with your staff, and ask for their ideas, right? A lot of the people who are working for tourism, in the tourism industry, they are young millennials and Generation Z. They know what the future holds, right? They have some really good ideas. And then, in the past, everybody's too busy. But now you've got a moment of that quietness. Maybe it's time to actually tap into your workforce and to get ideas from them, and to see that how can my business improve during a time when there's no tourism activities. So if you've always wanted to have that online booking system, maybe now is the time to build it. If you've been thinking about and renovating, for example, your homestead for as an accommodation business, maybe right now is the time to do it. If you're thinking about creating better collateral or content for your future marketing purpose, now is the time to do it. Because when the market recovers, you will not have the same time that you have now to do those things which have been on your to-do list for a very long time, right? And so I think that how to take this opportunity and be more productive, so that when the tourism activities switch back on, that you'll be better positioned than other businesses to make the most out of it, should be on the forefront of your plan for the next 6 months or so.
No, I think it's Oh, look, I mean, the dust is settling and the shock's probably still in the air, but once all that settled down, like you said, you know, human beings are very resilient, and we've come this far because we innovate, you know. We think of different things, and who would have thought Zoom or Skype call or WhatsApp call or WhatsApp, for example, you know, BBM was the thing, and then suddenly, what's BBM? Nobody seems to remember what BBM was. Everyone's using WhatsApp now, you know. At one point, Viber was very big. You know, no one uses Viber.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, and I mean, in some ways, you know, I'm not sure. I'm sitting here talking to you, and the aeroplanes keep flying by. People talk about the airline industry. And I'm sitting here thinking, well, I don't think there's anything wrong with the airline industry because the planes seem to be flying over my head. I'm noticing it more, maybe because I'm outside more now. I guess in some ways it will never go away, but I guess in some ways, where do you think that's going to end with that industry?
That's a very interesting topic. I think before COVID-19 crisis, even though that every week there are close to 200 inbound flights coming from China to Australia, close to half of that flights, they were not making money. A lot of Chinese airlines, for example, Hainan Airlines, Xiamen Airlines, Beijing Capital Airlines, Tianjin Airlines, you know, probably never heard of those airlines. They were all flying, you know, from China to Australia. And a lot of those airlines are funded by the provincial governments in China, trying to create the provincial capital to be an international gateway city. So even though the airlines don't make money, they're being paid by the government to fly. And for a political price of earmarking places like, you know, Changsha, Xi'an, Kunming, Wuhan, Nanjing to become international aviation gateways. Now, as those flights are making a loss, with the COVID-19, all these losses have stopped the provincial government being able to continue to pay for those services, and the airlines themselves would not necessarily fly the routes at a commercial loss, right? So I do expect that some of the aviation capacity from China to Australia will be dropped out. And in fact, I don't think that's a bad thing, right? I think it's actually helping airlines to become commercially successful and sustainable is the long-term cornerstone of a healthier aviation landscape. And, you know, when you look at Air China, China Eastern, China Southern, these players that operate from Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou, you know, first-tier cities into Australia, their routes are more sustainable. And when you have those other players coming in and start to fly from second-tier cities in China into Australia, being paid by provincial government, and then dumping airfare in the market, not only that, you know, these other airlines are not making money, but they're affecting the financial position of Air China, China Eastern, China Southern from servicing the market adequately. And, you know, after COVID-19, when we see a recalibration of aviation capacity, I actually think that those three big Chinese major carriers will start to make more profit out of Australian market, and through that they will make their commercial decision on adjusting additional service capacity into Australia, but on a more sustainable basis. So what we will see will no longer be the up and downs of the aviation capacity, but see a sustainable growth of aviation. And that's where I think this whole thing is heading to. But again, any recovery probably will have to wait until 2021 when we see that the borders being lifted. But I'm quite optimistic about the next Lunar New Year in 2021.
I agree. All right, Andy, thanks for giving time and fantastic conversation. You made some really good points. And I'm glad. I knew you're the man to talk to in about these topics. But maybe we can
Thank
have
you.
another chat. What was that?
Sure, we can have a chat when we finish all this, look back and say, "Oops, that was a heck of a a journey." Yeah. All right.
Thanks, Andy.
All right. Take care. Have a good weekend. Okay, mate. Take care. Listen, stay safe. All right. Okay. Bye.